You're not tired. You're performing exhaustion for an audience that doesn't exist. That hit you weird, didn't it? Good, because I spent years mistaking motion for meaning, and it almost cost me everything that actually mattered. Picture this. Me, sitting in my car outside some generic coffee shop, scrolling through my phone like it contained the secrets to existence. Sound familiar? Another day of checking boxes that felt important to everyone except the person checking them. Me. I was living in this weird loop where I'd wake up already behind, spend 8 hours being productive, then collapse into mindless content consumption until I passed out. Rinse, repeat, wonder why nothing felt real anymore. But here's the thing about transformation. It doesn't send you a calendar invite. It shows up disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoon boredom. I walked into that coffee shop planning to grab caffeine and scroll away another 15 minutes of my life. Instead, I encountered something that shattered every assumption I had about how I was choosing to exist. An older woman was sitting alone, writing in this beat-up notebook with the kind of focus I hadn't experienced in years. Not multitasking, not optimizing, just present. When was the last time you looked like that? When was the last time you were so absorbed in something that your phone could have exploded and you wouldn't have noticed? That question made my stomach drop. Because I couldn't remember. She wasn't doing anything Instagram-worthy. No laptop with designer stickers. No aesthetic flat lay of her workspace. Just a woman, a pen, and complete attention to whatever thoughts she was translating into words. Watching her, I realized something that made me want to throw my phone across the room. I had become allergic to my own mind. But what happened next exposed the real problem. Here's what nobody tells you about living on autopilot. You become incredibly efficient at avoiding yourself. I had perfected the art of keeping my brain occupied every waking second. Podcast during coffee, scroll while eating, Netflix while falling asleep. I was consuming content like it was oxygen, terrified of what I might discover in 30 seconds of silence. You know what that is? That's not being busy. That's being scared. Scared that if I stopped moving long enough, I'd realize I was building a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt hollow as hell on the inside. Scared that my thoughts, without external stimulation, might reveal truths I wasn't ready to face. I was carrying around beliefs that weren't even mine, inherited assumptions I'd never questioned. Productivity equals worth. If you're not stressed, you're not working hard enough. Your value is measured by how much you can squeeze into 24 hours. Pause right here. When was the last time you did something just because it felt right, not because it looked right on your personal highlight reel? Can't remember? Yeah, me neither. I had become a professional reactor, responding to notifications, other people's urgencies, this invisible pressure to always be on. My calendar was full, my phone was buzzing, and I wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. But here's the brutal truth. I wasn't important because I was busy. I was avoiding being present because presence felt dangerous. The woman at the coffee shop wasn't performing productivity. She wasn't optimizing her time or building her personal brand. She was just there, fully engaged with her own thoughts. When had I become so afraid of mine? Every free moment got immediately filled with content, noise, stimulation. I'd wake up and grab my phone before my feet hit the floor. I'd fall asleep to Netflix. I ate lunch while scrolling through other people's lives. I was living like my attention was worthless and my thoughts were the enemy. But sitting there, watching this woman exist without apologizing for taking up space, I realized something that changed everything. The woman looked up and caught me staring. Instead of the awkward moment I expected, she smiled and asked the simplest question. "What are you writing today?" I almost laughed. "I'm not writing anything, just thinking, I guess." "Same thing," she said. "You're just using your mind instead of paper." That hit different. When was the last time I'd given my thoughts the same respect I'd give to words on a page? When had I last sat with an idea long enough to see where it wanted to go instead of immediately reaching for distraction? She went back to her notebook, and suddenly I was sitting there with nothing but my own mind for company. No podcast to fill the silence. No scroll to numb the discomfort. Just me and whatever thoughts had been trying to get my attention for years. At first, it was brutal. My brain kept reaching for stimulation like a phantom limb. But then something shifted in that silence. Memories started surfacing. Not the highlight reel I usually accessed, but quieter ones. Being 12, building elaborate worlds with Legos for hours without checking the time once. College nights having conversations about existence that felt more important than anything else in the world. I remembered what it felt like to be curious instead of just efficient, to wonder instead of just worry, to create instead of just consume. When had I stopped being that person? When had wonder become a luxury I couldn't afford? But here's what really hit me. I had been living like someone else was writing my script. Not dramatically, not obviously, but in all those small daily choices that add up to a lifetime. I was optimizing for metrics that someone else had defined as important. I was solving problems that someone else had convinced me I should have. The woman was still writing, and I found myself wondering what her story was. What had she learned that allowed her to sit so peacefully with herself? What did she know about attention that I had forgotten? But the real question that emerged from that silence was harder to face. Sitting there, one thought kept circling back like a vulture. You've been living someone else's life. Not stolen, not forced, but chosen unconsciously, one distracted moment at a time. I thought about my typical day. Wake up, phone check, anxiety spike from notifications I didn't need, coffee while scrolling through lives I wasn't living, work that felt important to everyone except me, lunch eaten while multitasking, more work, mindless evening routine, sleep, repeat until death. When had I started measuring my worth by how much I could cram into 24 hours instead of how present I could be in each moment? Here's the belief that shattered, I don't have time to slow down. The truth? I didn't have time not to slow down. I was spending so much energy managing my overwhelm that I had no energy left for anything that actually mattered to me. I had confused motion with progress, busy with meaningful, urgent with important. The woman finished whatever she was writing and closed her notebook with this satisfied sigh. Not the sigh of someone exhausted, but of someone who had just completed something that felt worth doing. When was the last time I had felt that kind of completion? When was the last time I finished something and thought, that was time well spent? I realized I had been living in permanent partial attention, always half focused on the current moment and half worried about the next thing on my list. Present in body, absent in spirit. But here's what nobody tells you about recognition. It hurts before it heals. Seeing how I'd been living felt like watching myself sleepwalk through my own existence. I was drowning in shallow water while convinced I was swimming in the deep end. The scariest part? I had become incredibly good at being productive and incredibly bad at being alive. But recognizing the problem was just the beginning. What came next changed everything. You're optimizing your schedule while ignoring your soul. That's the real tragedy, isn't it? You've become incredibly efficient at managing a life that doesn't actually feel like yours. Something fundamental shifted in that moment. Not a lightning bolt, more like adjusting the focus on a camera that had been blurry for years. I started seeing my life from the inside out instead of the outside in. Instead of, what should I be doing? I asked. What do I actually want to be doing? Instead of, what will look impressive? I asked. What will feel meaningful? Instead of, how can I be more productive? I asked. How can I be more present? The woman packed up her things and walked past my table. She paused and said, the words will come when you're ready for them. Then she was gone. But her presence had created this space where I could finally hear my own thoughts. And what I heard surprised me. I heard a voice that had been trying to get my attention for years. You miss creating just for the joy of it. You want relationships that go deeper than small talk. You care more about understanding yourself than impressing strangers. Here's what hit me. I had been living like time was infinite, and attention was worthless. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Time is the most finite resource we have. Attention is the most valuable thing we can give to others, to our work, to ourselves. Sitting in that coffee shop, I started to see my life as this incredible opportunity to pay attention, to notice, to choose consciously instead of just reacting automatically. I thought about all the sunsets I'd missed because I was looking at my phone, all the conversations I'd half listened to because my mind was somewhere else, all the moments of simple joy I'd overlooked because they weren't productive. But here's the shift that changed everything. I realized that paying attention isn't a luxury. It's the only way to actually live the life you're spending so much energy trying to optimize. You're not behind in life. You're just not present for the one you're living. And that realization led to something I didn't expect. I didn't wait until Monday to start living differently. I didn't create a vision board or write out 90-day goals. I started right there with the smallest possible rebellion. I put my phone in my pocket and ordered coffee without multitasking. Sounds stupid, right? But when you've been living on autopilot for years, even standing in line without stimulation feels revolutionary. The barista asked how my day was going. Instead of the automatic, fine, I actually thought about it. I'm having one of those days where everything feels different, I said. We talked for 3 minutes about coffee preferences. It was more genuine than most interactions I'd had that month. That afternoon, I called my sister. Not because I needed something, but just to hear her voice and ask how she was really doing. We talked for an hour without me once checking my phone. That evening, instead of my usual Netflix and scroll routine, I sat on my balcony and just existed. No music, no podcast, no phone. Just me and the sound of the city winding down. It was uncomfortable as hell at first. My brain kept reaching for stimulation like an addict reaching for a fix. But after a few minutes, I started hearing things I'd never noticed. Birds, distant conversations, the rhythm of my own breathing. Here's what I started doing. The attention experiment. Every day I picked one routine activity and did it with complete presence. Brushing my teeth, walking to my car, eating breakfast. Not to achieve anything measurable, just to practice being where I was instead of where I thought I should be. The changes were immediate. Food tasted better when I wasn't scrolling while eating. Conversations became more interesting when I stopped half-planning my next response. Even work became more engaging when I stopped checking email every 5 minutes. But here's the real test. I started saying no to things that felt obligatory, and yes, to things that felt curious. I bought a notebook and started writing down thoughts that seemed worth keeping. Not for anyone else, not for content, just for me. If this is hitting different, do me a favor and subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, but because conversations about actually living instead of just surviving need to reach people who are ready to hear them. The biggest change wasn't what I added to my life. It was what I subtracted. I removed layers of noise that I'd mistaken for living. Constant news updates that made me anxious about things I couldn't control. Social media feeds that made me compare my insides to everyone else's outsides. Commitments I'd said yes to out of guilt instead of genuine interest. Creating space in my life felt like taking off clothes that were 2 sizes too small. Suddenly I could breathe again. Test this. Choose one thing you do every day and do it without distraction for 10 minutes. Just 10. See what happens when you stop running from your own mind. But here's what nobody tells you about these changes. Those 15 minutes happened 3 years ago, but they echo in everything I do now. Not because they were dramatic, but because they taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. You're not broken. You're just not paying attention. The woman with the notebook gave me permission to stop performing productivity and start practicing presence. In a world that profits from your distraction, choosing to pay attention becomes a radical act. I still catch myself slipping into old patterns, phone checking, people-pleasing, optimizing for busy instead of meaningful. The difference is that now I notice when I'm doing it, and noticing is the first step toward choosing differently. Here's what changed. I stopped treating my attention like it was worthless and started treating it like the most valuable thing I own. The most surprising thing about living more intentionally? It's not that life becomes perfect. It's that you develop a different relationship with whatever comes up. Instead of automatically reacting, you create space to respond consciously. I kept that notebook habit. Not every day, not with any particular system, but regularly enough that I've started to recognize my own patterns. When I'm avoiding something important, when I'm operating from fear instead of curiosity, when I'm solving the wrong problems? What would change if you approached tomorrow like it was an opportunity to notice instead of just survive? The truth is, we're all walking around with the capacity for these 15-minute revelations. The question is whether we're moving too fast to notice them. You don't need a dramatic wake-up call. You don't need permission from a stranger. You can start paying attention right now, wherever you are. Tell me in the comments, what's one thing you do every day that you've never done with complete attention? I'll read every response. So here's my final provocation. You're not stuck. You're just trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem isn't that you need more time, more motivation, or more discipline. The problem is that you've been living like your own life isn't worth paying attention to. Those 15 minutes taught me that the life I was searching for wasn't somewhere else. It was happening right here, behind all the noise I'd been using to avoid it. Your transformation doesn't need to wait for the perfect moment. It's available right now, in the next 15 minutes, if you're brave enough to pay attention. What is your life trying to tell you that you've been too distracted to hear? For the next 10 minutes? Just 10? What would it look like to actually be here? Not planning the next thing, not solving tomorrow's problems, not performing productivity. Just here, with whatever is in front of you right now. Stop performing. Start noticing. Your life is happening whether you're present for it or not.